Okay, so get this. Imagine yourself just feet away from President Kennedy when those shots rang out in Dallas.
Oh, wow.
You see everything, the blood, the chaos, the absolute horror of it all.
I can't even imagine.
That's what happened to Paul Landis. He was a Secret Service agent assigned to the Kennedys.
Right.
He was right there in the motorcade, saw the assassination firsthand,
Wow.
and even picked up what looked like an intact bullet from the limo.
Seriously.
Yeah, a bullet that for some reason never made it into the official reports.
It's wild, right? It's like this one detail. Landis's story just throws another log onto the fire of mystery that's been burning around JFK's assassination for like over 60 years.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's exactly why we're doing this deep dive today.
Uh-huh.
To unpack some of those mysteries, you've shared some great sources with us. An audio documentary with interviews from Landis himself, a veteran journalist who's dug deep into the CIA's possible role, and a historian who really helps us see how the Cold War loomed over everything.
It's interesting, isn't it? After all these years, people are still captivated by the JFK assassination. Why do you think that is?
I think because it was such a huge turning point,
Yeah.
and there are just so many unanswered questions. I bet you've got your own theories about what happened.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And I'm willing to bet this deep dive will make you rethink at least a few of them.
Oh, I'm sure.
So before we get into the theories, let's do a quick recap of what we know for sure. November 22nd, 1963, Dallas, Texas President Kennedy and Jackie Kennedy are riding in an open car as part of a motorcade.
Right.
Then shots ring out and everything descends into chaos.
This is where Paul Landis's account becomes so powerful. He was right there, just behind the president's car. He describes seeing Kennedy's head basically explode in a mist of blood. It's a really graphic image that just drives home how brutal the assassination was.
And then there's that bullet he found. Landis said it looked totally intact, even had the markings you'd see from a rifle.
Wow.
He took it, thinking it was important evidence. And later, amidst all the chaos at the hospital, he put the bullet on a stretcher near the president's body. He figured it would be found during the autopsy.
But it wasn't. That missing bullet just throws more fuel on the conspiracy theories. It makes you think what else might have been missed or even deliberately covered up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So to get to the bottom of things, the Warren Commission was formed to investigate the assassination. Their job was to give the nation some definitive answers. They came back and said that Lee Harvey Oswald, working alone, fired 3 shots from the Texas School Book Depository and killed. Kennedy case closed, no conspiracy, or so they thought.
The Warren Commission's report might have sounded definitive, but the public wasn't buying it. Right from the start, polls showed that most Americans just didn't believe in the lone gunman theory, and that skepticism has only grown stronger over time.
So let's talk about Oswald. He was an ex-Marine who had defected to the Soviet Union and then come back to the U.S. But here's where it gets really interesting. Just a few weeks before the assassination, Oswald visited both the Cuban and Soviet embassies in Mexico City.
And the CIA knew about this visit at the time, but their stories about what they knew about Oswald before and after the assassination just don't line up. It really makes you question what they might have been hiding and why.
And remember, this was the Cold War. If it came out that a former defector to the Soviet Union had assassinated the president, it could have led to a war.
Absolutely.
So maybe some people felt it was better to pin it on a lone gunman and avoid a global conflict.
To make things even more suspicious, before he was shot by Jack Ruby Oswald himself, insisted that he was a patsy, meaning he was being set up to take the blame.
Wait, so this burlesque dancer actually visited Ruby in jail. What did she say that convinced her he was forced into it?
Well, according to Jefferson Motley, this journalist we mentioned who's an expert on the CIA, Ruby apparently told her he didn't have a choice. It definitely adds another layer to this whole thing, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's not like Ruby was some random guy off the street. He owned a nightclub, had connections to organized crime, and then he just happens to shoot Oswald on live TV while he's being transferred between jails.
The official story was that Ruby did it out of some misplaced sense of chivalry to spare Jackie Kennedy the trauma of a trial.
But some people argue that Ruby was actually trying to protect JFK's reputation by silencing Oswald. What do you make of that theory?
It's an interesting thought, but honestly, given Ruby's background and his connections, it's hard not to question if there was something darker going on, something he felt he couldn't refuse.
And it's not just the mystery surrounding Ruby that raises questions. The FBI, which was supposed to be protecting the president, also made some serious mistakes.
Yeah, they had files on Oswald, but it seems like they didn't take him as a serious threat.
Really?
There was even a time when Oswald threatened to blow up the FBI's Dallas office.
You're kidding.
Yes. But instead of investigating further, the FBI just sort of brushed it off.
Yeah.
And later, it seems like they tried to cover up the whole incident.
So you've got all these strange coincidences, and then you have the FBI dropping the ball. It really makes you wonder if there was a deliberate attempt to sweep things under the rug. Maybe someone wanted to avoid a scandal or prevent a war, so they made sure Oswald was the only one left to take the blame.
Absolutely. You also have to remember that the Kennedy administration was involved in some shady stuff too, especially when it came to Cuba. They had authorized covert operations against Castro, even assassination attempts, and some of those plots involved figures from organized crime.
Oh, wow. So if a full investigation into JFK's assassination had uncovered all of that, it would have been a huge mess for the U.S. government.
Exactly. The motive to cover up any whiff of a conspiracy was incredibly strong.
It's like a puzzle where some of the pieces have been deliberately removed.
We haven't even talked about the congressional investigations that happened later. The Church Committee in 1975 and the House Select Committee on Assassinations a couple of years later both took a hard look at JFK's death. They dug up a lot of dirt, but they also left us with a lot of unanswered questions.
Okay, so tell me about those investigations. What were the biggest things they uncovered?
Well, the Church Committee found that the CIA had been involved in all sorts of illegal activities, but for some reason they stopped short of fully investigating the JFK assassination.
Huh. Do you think they were trying to protect Kennedy's legacy, or were they worried about what they might find?
It's hard to say for sure, but it definitely leaves you wondering. And then you have the House Select Committee. Based on some audio evidence, they actually concluded that there was probably a conspiracy.
Wait, are you saying the government itself admitted there was a conspiracy?
Well, sort of. They said it was likely, but then they didn't say WHO was involved or what their motives were. It's almost like they opened a door, peeked inside, and then slammed it shut.
Frustrating. Or do you think you're finally getting somewhere and then it's like hitting a brick wall?
Yeah,
All this secrecy just feeds the conspiracy theories.
I completely agree. But here's the thing. Even if we never know for sure who was behind JFK's assassination, the impact of this event is undeniable.
Yeah.
Think about how much trust you have in the government and the media today. Do you think events like this contributed to the skepticism we see now?
Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, imagine how you would feel if the president was murdered and no one could really explain why.
I get it.
You'd probably start to question everything, right?
It was a turning point in American history. Before the assassination, public confidence in institutions was pretty high. But afterwards, that trust eroded, and it hasn't really recovered.
Okay, but let's go back to Paul Landis
Yeah.
and that bullet he found. That detail was ignored for years, but it just makes the whole story even more suspicious.
It is fascinating. Remember, he found a whole bullet, not just a fragment. But the Warren Commission said there were only 3 shots, and they had all 3 bullets accounted for.
So where did that extra bullet come from? It's like something out of an X-Files episode.
Exactly. And Landis wasn't some random bystander. He was a Secret Service agent trained to observe and protect. His testimony carries a lot of weight. But for some reason, no one took his story seriously for years.
And now some people are saying the bullet Landis found might have actually been on Governor Connolly's stretcher, not Kennedy's.
It just adds another layer of confusion, doesn't it? This whole thing is so complex. Every time you pull on one thread, another mystery unravels.
So where does that leave us?
I think it leaves us with a responsibility to keep asking questions and to be wary of simple explanations. We may never know the whole truth about the JFK assassination, but by digging deeper, by listening to firsthand accounts like Paul Landis's, and by challenging the official story, we can try to piece together what really happened.
And even if we never uncover some giant conspiracy, I think the search for truth is still valuable. This whole thing is a reminder that history is not just a bunch of facts and dates in a textbook. It's about people, their motivations, and the choices they make.
I completely agree. And sometimes the most important historical events are the ones that leave us with more questions than answers.
I think that's a great place to leave things for this part of the dive. But there's still a lot to unpack.
Right.
We need to look at the broader context, the Cold War, the political climate, and what it all means for us today.
Okay, so we've talked about the assassination itself, conflicting evidence, the investigations that followed. But now I kind of want to zoom out a little bit and look at the bigger picture. Like, what are some of the lasting effects of JFK's assassination, and how does it connect to our world today?
Well, one of the most significant consequences was the erosion of public trust. Think about it. If the government could cover up something as big as the president's assassination, what else might they be hiding?
Yeah, it's kind of like that saying, once trust is broken, it's hard to rebuild.
Exactly. And this distrust wasn't just limited to the government. It extended to the media, to
Yeah.
law enforcement, to institutions in general.
It makes you wonder how we as a society can ever fully trust anyone or anything again after something like that happens. Yeah, it's a valid question, and there are no easy answers, but I think one of the most important things we can do is to stay informed, to ask questions,
Hmm.
and to be critical of the information we're given.
So don't just blindly accept everything you hear, right? Do your own research, look for different perspectives, and come to your own conclusions.
Absolutely. And I think that's especially important in today's world where we're bombarded with information from all sides. It's easy to get swept up in conspiracy theories or to accept simplistic explanations without really thinking critically.
So how do we avoid falling into those traps? How do we know what to believe?
It's about developing those critical thinking skills. Look for evidence, consider the source, and be open to the possibility that you might be wrong.
It's like being a detective, right? You have to weigh the evidence, follow the clues,
Yeah.
and be willing to challenge your own assumption.
Exactly. And that's why events like the JFK assassination are still so relevant today. They remind us that history is not just a collection of facts and dates. It's a process of inquiry, debate, and interpretation.
So it's a story that's constantly being rewritten as new evidence comes to light and new perspectives emerge.
Think about it this way. Every time a new document is declassified, every time a witness comes forward with a new piece of information, our understanding of the JFK assassination shifts. The story evolves.
It's almost as if we're all collectively piecing together a giant puzzle, but we don't have all the pieces yet.
And we may never have all the pieces, but the search itself is valuable. It forces us to confront uncomfortable truths about power secrecy and the limits of our own knowledge.
It's also a reminder that history is never truly settled. It's a living, breathing thing that continues to shape our present and our future.
The JFK assassination, with all its unanswered questions and lingering mysteries, forces us to think about the world we live in today. It makes us question who we trust, who has power, and how that power is used.
It also makes us think about the importance of truth, transparency, and accountability.
Those are values that are more important now than ever before.
So what's the takeaway here for our listener? What should they be thinking about after this deep dive?
I think the most important thing is to stay curious, to keep asking questions, and to never stop searching for the truth. The JFK assassination is a reminder that even in a democracy, even in the age of information, truth can be elusive. But that doesn't mean we should give up the search.
It's a story that continues to fascinate and intrigue us, and will probably continue to do so for generations to come.
And maybe, just maybe, someday we'll have all the pieces of the puzzle. But until then, we have a responsibility to keep digging, to keep questioning, and to keep the conversation going.
So to wrap this up, let's go back to that provocative question we posed earlier. We talked a lot about who might have wanted JFK dead. But what about this? Who benefited most from Lee Harvey Oswald being silenced before he could tell his story? And how does that silencing continue today with so many documents related to the assassination still classified?
Those are questions worth pondering.
The full truth of the JFK assassination might forever remain a shadowy echo of that day in Dallas. But by examining the evidence, by questioning what we think we know, we can at least try to get closer to the truth.
Remember, history is not just something that happened in the past. It shapes who we are, how we think, and the world we live in today. The JFK assassination is a perfect example of that.
That's all the time we have for today's deep dive into the JFK assassination. We hope this has inspired you to explore these sources yourself and come to your own conclusions. Keep questioning, keep learning, and most importantly, keep the conversation going.